Hey there, this is Matthew with Disarm Harm. On this episode, we're going to be teaching you guys research methods in psychology, the difference between science and common sense. It's not that common. All right, welcome back. So the first thing I'm going to get you guys to do is I'm going to get you go to opentextbc.ca/research methods, where you can download Research Methods in Psychology, the second Canadian edition. Here are the authors. I should note, you guys, that this is a copyright attribution non-commercial share-alike, which means that this information can be duplicated at your leisure. However, it can not be used for non-commercial purposes. All right, let's get cracking. Chapter 1 and the Science of Psychology, Science and Common Sense. Science, common sense. So we actually all have beliefs. We have beliefs surrounding people's attitudes, thoughts, and feelings. These beliefs are referred to as folk psychology. Although there is much of it that is accurate, there is still more of it yet that actually is not. Most people believe that anger is relieved by letting it out, breaking something, hitting something, by using a method called displacement, in terms of like hitting or putting our anger into something. Research is showing that it actually tends to make people more angry, not less. Scott Lilienfeld, who is a big time hero of mine, big supporter of heterodoxy, huge supporter of challenging the status quo, especially in the field of psychology, wrote the 50 Great Myths of Popular Psychology. People use only 10% of their brain power. We found out that people tend to actually use 100% of their brain power. Most people experience a midlife crisis in their 40s and 50s. The trouble with defining what that looks like is, what is a midlife crisis, right? Students learn best when teaching styles are matched to their learning styles. So, the kinesthetic, auditory, visual learning styles, those learning styles have been actually completely debunked. They don't exist. They aren't even quantifiable. They aren't measurable. What they ended up finding was that there was no correlation behind teaching kids based on their declared learning style or the learning style tests, as well as testing or other outcomes. What they did end up finding was that a good teacher is par for the course. It's kind of necessary, but more importantly, setting really good expectations for students, and then a good teacher encouraging those expectations for students is super important. Low self-esteem is a major cause of psychological harm. This is simply not true. There are many causes of psychological harm. Low self-esteem is not one of the biggest factors when it comes to it. And then psychiatric admissions and crimes increase during a full moon. There is no correlation behind psychiatric admission rates or crime rates and full moons. All of these are actually false. So how is it we can be so wrong in the first place? Well, psychologists have studied that too. They've identified many factors. The first is that we actually tend to rely on mental shortcuts that we call heuristics. If it makes intuitive sense, we tend to think it's true. Heuristics is further compounded by our confirmation bias, meaning that we tend to focus on cases that confirm our intuitive beliefs, our intuition, and not the cases that actually disconfirm them. We have this weird tendency to look for evidence that agrees with our pre-existing conditions, which is why I am such a big believer in heterodoxy. It is basically a method that takes established institutions or established orthodox thinking in institutions and serves up an opinion using much better research methods or research material than the previous established institutional belief. It tends to piss a lot of people off because people have been spending a lot of time under one belief in this confirmation bias system and then looking for content with that. And what often happens is they get attached to this thing called a sunk cost fallacy, where what occurs is that they've spent hours, weeks, days, months researching this one bias that they have, supporting it, loving it, falling in love with it, discovering what is and what isn't correct, what is and what isn't right. And then ultimately you present something that's dismantling to all of that. and they tend to get pretty emotional because of the sunk cost. So, for example, many people believe that calorie-reducing diets are a sufficient treatment for obesity. They aren't. In modern nutrition, what they have come to discover is that that obesity is actually a disease, much like diabetes or cancer. It is directly influenced by a variety of factors, and calorie restriction is oftentimes not the only solution. It is one of many solutions for sure, but people who are obese tend to experience a lot of chemical irregularities, specifically out of their adipose or their fat tissue, which tends to interfere with things like the secretion of ghrelin, which is their hunger hormone, and its relationship to the hypothalamus, and a variety of other things that tend to cause these people to ingest more than what the average person who has a normal working hormonal pattern would experience. That is not nutritional advice, by the way. Go and seek a registered dietitian or a nutritionist. It is just a finding of this particular study, which you are more than welcome to go and have a look for yourself. Scientists, especially psychologists, understand that they're actually susceptible to these sorts of beliefs, which is why they cultivate an attitude of skepticism. Most people know skepticism is a word. Skepticism isn't just a word, it is actually a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking, right? So skepticism is actually the big sister to Stoicism, and Stoicism is a way of thinking that was often replaced or later replaced with, believe it or not, Christianity, or Christianity at the very least absorbed this as a higher moral way of thinking. So there is science and common sense that goes into a lot of this. Oftentimes there's not enough evidence to actually fully evaluate a belief or a claim, which many scientists also cultivate what they call a tolerance of uncertainty. They accept many things they simply do not know. In other words, they know their limitations. So, for example, there's no scientific evidence that receiving an allowance actually causes children to be more financially responsible, nor is there any evidence that it causes them to be more materialistic. Some good questions to ask yourself then, if you're going to be reviewing material in order to cultivate this attitude of skepticism, is to first ask is the author a scientific researcher? I mean, if they're just writing a puff piece, or they're a journalist, or they're, a single mom who just wants to write something really inspirational and calls it psychology, you've got to be aware of that, right? Is this person a scientific researcher? Is there any scientific evidence actually cited in their material? Is another really good way of looking into this. And then, has anyone else studied the material? So a single study isn't actually a good study. It just means it's a lonely study, right? A lonely study in the scientific community isn't a great study. Oftentimes you want to see people arguing back and forth with confirmation, denial, those kinds of things, and where they're going to go with that. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell below, you guys. And like I said, this is a open copyright, so for non-commercial purposes, please respect it as such. Go to disarmharm.com to take the course and test online for free, where you can take more of these courses. Again, disarmharm.com to take the course and test online. Absolutely no charge. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.